I was just an ordinary guy running a small restaurant until the game I mastered, dying and respawning endlessly, suddenly became real, which means the world can end any moment without warning. Thankfully, with the strange ability to open dimensional gates, I now move between this world and another, preparing for the coming collapse. Soon, familiar faces from my gaming past begin to appear. The final battle has arrived and I gotta plan everything just right. Mr. President asks everyone to make sure everyone around hears what he is about to say. After a brief silence, once the ratings are skyrocketing, he declares emergency martial law. The army has taken control of media outlets and key infrastructure, and major roads have been closed. The reason he has gone to such lengths is, President takes another pause as he is unable to muster the courage to reveal the truth. But after a smoke, he reveals that the reason he ordered martial law is because he wanted to face an orderly end. Since the scenario of the game called Survival Life is happening in reality, and with it, the asteroid that appears in that game, Zambi, is also heading straight for the Earth to bring about the end of the world. Later, the US military tries and fails to intercept Zambi. As a result, the asteroid ultimately fell in the waters near Okinawa, and devastating damage has been confirmed. Regrettably, the Japanese people are now turning into zombies, and the zombie force derived from that damned Zambi will make landfall in their country at 1 p.m. today. President makes it clear that they cannot avoid this zombie outbreak. According to their findings, it seems a minority, including the awakened, have a chance to avoid zombification. So he has prepared something for them. To ensure safety, they are scheduled to open in 1 year, but he has installed time shelters at the marked locations. So he requests them to make their way there. Finally, he also shares a strategy guide for the monsters that appear in the early stages, and all this information will also be delivered again via leaflets dropped from airplanes. Soon, all thermal power plants will shut down. President finally says that he is a man with many shortcomings, but still, he believes he has done what's needed to be done in the final moments. He also thanks the anonymous informant who provided so much info to them. After hearing all this, I turned off the TV. I really hoped the apocalypse wouldn't really arrive, but still, since it's come to this, I have to survive, right? As a veteran of the apocalypse. A few months ago, I had been part of a small group of players betting around in an online VR game called Survival Life, which we nicknamed Sieta. It was just me, Jack, Princess, and Survivor 1. The game mixed zombies with fantasy monsters and had such an absurd difficulty that even the most seasoned Korean gamers were shocked. It failed to maintain popularity and eventually collapsed, leaving only the 4 of us as its remaining concurrent users after a year. Then, out of nowhere, one of us noticed the chat had moved for the first time in ages. Someone new had appeared, asking if anyone was there. Even though it was just a tiny change, we got excited. There were suddenly 5 concurrent users. We welcomed the newcomer enthusiastically. The newbie seemed thrilled and said he would contact us again after clearing the tutorial, but 2 hours later, he complained that the tutorial was impossibly hard and said he was giving up before disappearing. The 4 of us were genuinely disappointed. After losing yet another player, we even started discussing whether the game's difficulty should be lowered while adding more content, wondering what the developers were thinking. Before long, Survivor 1 decided to log out for the day. The others asked if he would be back tomorrow, and he only answered that he probably would. The silence that followed made it clear to all of us, Princess, Duck Butt Quack Quack, and me, that our journey was reaching its end. They eventually logged out too, saying they needed to touch some grass. Felt like no one would ever return. But I stayed behind. I couldn't bring myself to let go. Even as the number of veterans logging in dwindled day by day, I remained alone, recording update videos, streaming day and night, waiting just in case any of them joined the broadcast again. A few months passed quickly. The tutorial difficulty was drastically lowered and the early game experience improved. New monsters started appearing, not just zombies and fantasy creatures, but grotesquely mutated ones too. I was thrilled by the massive update, but my friends had already lost interest and stopped logging in entirely, leaving Sieta with only 1 active user, me. Sometimes, even I felt hopeless about the game and thought about quitting. Felt pointless. Then one day, I received a notification from the Survival Life operations team. They announced that the game would be completely terminated in 1 week and thanked the remaining users. Couldn't believe it. Felt like they had been waiting for me to finally give up. I had originally wanted to quit only after my friends returned, but faced with reality, I stopped recording, took off my gear, and deleted the streaming account where I had accumulated 5,500 hours of playtime. I couldn't bring myself to throw away the hard drive containing those memories, so I stored it away. After that, my life became nothing more than than running my small restaurant, serving teppanyaki and rolls of kimbap. It wasn't the life I had dreamed of, but at least it explained why my in-game ID had been Kimbap Lover. Business was going well enough. I ran the restaurant on the first floor of the house I inherited after my parents passed away when I was in high school, and I lived on the second floor. Whenever the food was ready, I went downstairs to serve it. Around that time, I got to know Mi Kyung, the neighborhood hairdresser and a regular customer. She really liked my cooking and often complimented it, and it was obvious to anyone that she was pretty. One day, she showed me something on her phone, some online post that was blowing up on community boards. It was about someone claiming to have received a status window and telling others to try shouting it out loud to make it appear. Most people in the comments didn't believe it, but a few insisted it worked. Mi Kyung mentioned that she had already tried it, but nothing happened for her. I laughed and told her there was no way something like that could be real and that she was being too gullible. But when I was alone later, I tried it myself. I shouted status window as loudly as I could. At first, nothing happened, just as I expected, but then suddenly it appeared. It was real. I saw a display showing my level, stat points, health at 11, strength at 12, agility at 9, dexterity at 11, perception at 10, and a trait called Dedicated Portal. There was even a system notification saying that the Dedicated Portal skill was available only to trait holders, with a command to open a portal. I thought the command sounded ridiculous, but I tried it anyway and said it out loud. Portal opened right in front of me. It looked exactly like the labyrinth entrance from Seida. Couldn't believe it. If it were real, there should have at least been some news about zombies. When I checked online, I found an article about an asteroid called Nzambi being monitored by NASA. The article claimed it had almost no chance of approaching Earth, but the mere fact that it existed unsettled me. I told myself it could still be a coincidence, that it was too soon to jump to conclusions, but if it was real, then the proof would have to be inside the portal. I had been hoping to find some kind of proof, but I also realized it might be too dangerous to go in without a plan. So after changing my mind, I stuck a ladle through the bottom of the portal to feel what was on the ground. At first, I only touched dirt, which at least meant the other side wasn't a labyrinth. I wondered if the portal might just be warping me somewhere else on Earth. Since I had done the bare minimum for safety and preparation, I decided to go inside. After making up my mind, I stepped through and was immediately stunned. I couldn't believe what I was seeing and kept questioning if it was real. The weather was cold, and my phone had no signal, so I assumed I was somewhere extremely remote. I started marking my surroundings with my marker, knowing that for now, I had no way of confirming my location. The most important goal was to find proof, so I began exploring and leaving markers behind. Still, the whole situation was wearing me down. The forest felt endlessly large, and nothing appeared. Not a single sign of anything. It was getting boring, but then I was suddenly attacked. I saw a creature identified by the system as a valley deer. That alone made me wonder if this place wasn't Earth. It stared at me intensely, and I was scared for a moment, but it didn't behave aggressively. Even then, I couldn't say I had found proof of an impending apocalypse. It would have been different if I had seen stone monkeys or humped boars. I had never encountered a valley deer in Seida. Deep down, I had a hunch that this place was connected to survival life, but I forced myself to ignore it. I kept exploring because I wanted to deny that a disaster was coming to humanity, but that hope didn't last. I eventually found a sun apple. I thought it would be harmless and took a bite, and a notification appeared telling me my stamina had been slightly restored by its effect. It was identical to the sun apple juice from the game's cash shop. That practically confirmed everything. And on top of that, I also found goblin droppings. I struggled internally to accept the reality, but there was no denying it anymore. The end was coming. Once that sense of déjà vu turned into certainty, I immediately left the portal and started preparing. The first thing I did was pull out the hard drive I had stored away and review my early game footage. I had only streamed and recorded because I enjoyed the game. I couldn't believe it was now being used for something like this. There were 32 days left until the apocalypse. Looking back, survival life had always been full of unfriendly and frustrating mechanics. The worst of them all was the Iron Death disease, a phenomenon that caused all metal to crumble away. It would sweep through areas contaminated by zombie spores like an aftershock, and 5 hours later, human civilization would instantly be thrown back into the Stone Age. The disease eventually subsided depending on the region, but the problem was that it took anywhere from 6 months to a year. However, that catastrophic threat no longer mattered to me. The trait I obtained was Private Portal, and although it was just a hypothesis, the Iron Death disease shouldn't be able to pass through it. After finishing my initial analysis, I used the money I had saved to buy survival supplies, weapons, food, tools, medicine, and anything necessary for self-sufficiency. At the awakened community, I saw people discussing awakening. While checking the atmosphere to decide what to do next, I read posts where some users complained about repeated claims and demanded proof, while others dismissed everything as nonsense. A few insisted that people should wait until official news came out, and one even bragged about using their trait to steal 7 million won. After reading all that, I couldn't believe how carefree they were. As soon as morning came, I bought more supplies. On my way home, I purchased a 60-pound hunting bow through a private sale. The seller thanked me for the smooth transaction, and I told him I was the one who should be grateful since I really needed it. Later, as I told him to take care, I wondered if I was just overreacting alone. If nothing happened, then so be it. I would just struggle through the next 2 or 3 years. After finishing my errands and returning home, I put up a sign on my shop so I wouldn't waste any time. I wrote that the store would be temporarily closed for a few months due to remodeling. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept thinking about how everything had changed overnight. But then suddenly I saw Mi Kyung, who asked if I was closing down the shop. I told her it wasn't shutting down, just getting old, and that I was planning some remodeling. She commented that I must have made a lot of money, and I explained it wasn't like that, just that the place was aging. I said I had something to take care of and excused myself. Right before leaving, she hesitated and started to ask me something, calling me a Jushi, but after thinking for a moment, she said it was nothing and left. I wondered what she had been trying to say. I could have asked, but I kept quiet because from now on I had serious things to focus on. I opened the portal again. My gameplay style had always been that of a planner who created detailed strategies to overcome challenges, which was why I lacked physical skill compared to other veterans. In Sura, stats weren't earned by leveling up but through hunting and exploration. While testing the bow, I wondered if I could actually handle it. Drawing it was easier than I expected. I kept trying one shot, then another, and figured that if I could just aim properly, it might work. Someone behind me urged me to take the shot, so I prepared, recalled my in-game persona, and released the arrow. It felt surprisingly good, almost like I'd been Legolas in a past life. I could only pull the string properly around 5 times, but it wasn't bad. From that day onward, I decided to train my strength seriously. After finishing the basic preparations, I moved on to the next step. I had 2 priorities. First, to figure out whether I could hunt monsters in my current state, and second, to build a hideout where I could store supplies. Until the weapons and equipment I ordered arrived, I wasn't about to do anything reckless like taking over a nest. My luck felt unreal. Preparing for every situation and planning ahead had always been the reason I survived as a veteran in Sura. Still, there was something specific I was searching for. I remembered seeing it nearby, and eventually I found it: goblin droppings. I had been looking for them for a simple reason. Goblins normally lived in groups. Finding a single pile was abnormal, and the fact that it contained only seeds suggested it hadn't been eating properly. Just as I had predicted, there was a high chance the goblin was an outcast from its group. I felt determined to track it down no matter what. Opportunities to test myself in a real fight weren't something I could take lightly. But while I was searching, the light began to fade. Hearing a wolf's howl in the distance reassured me that I was getting closer to the valley. Soon after, I spotted a goblin. It looked disturbingly identical to the ones I had seen in Sura. The system identified it as Monster Number 1, a low-tier species. I remembered that goblins typically used spears and poison darts, and they were especially fond of paralyzing their opponents before tormenting them. That memory was the exact reason I had chosen a bow as my first weapon. I forced myself to stay calm. The goblin seemed old, and maybe because it had been exiled, it wasn't carrying poison darts or a spear. If I didn't panic, I felt confident I could hunt it. I fired my arrow, and although I had been aiming for the head, it still struck the goblin cleanly. I tried to press the advantage and go for another shot, but before I could, the goblin suddenly attacked me. It moved like a seasoned veteran. I realized I would have to fight it using the same tactics I had relied on in old fighting games. When I went in to strike, the goblin dodged repeatedly, and when it attacked, I barely managed to avoid its blows. It was relentless, so I finally rushed in and tackled it, then finished it off. A notification appeared, telling me that I had acquired 2 points. I felt a rush of certainty. I had actually done it. Then I noticed a small pouch the goblin had been carrying. Inside, I found guava powder and vegetable oil. I remembered that combining the 2 in Sura created an ointment, so I planned to try it. I needed to hurry and bury the body. If the group discovered it, things would become dangerous, and if I left it exposed, it would eventually turn into a bone creeper. While I was preparing to deal with it, I noticed a red trout in the nearby water. If this really was a valley where red trout lived, then that meant there could also be valley bears, the kind of monster no one wanted to run into. At that realization, I knew I might be in serious trouble. Back when I used to live stream as Kimbaplover, I would talk endlessly about all the monsters that inhabited the forest. I explained everything I knew, even though most people in the comments just called the content boring. They never understood how much effort I put into it. I wished they could have appreciated it at least a little. At one point, a viewer with the username Pitiful Man donated 5,001 because he thought the stream might be fun. It was exactly the kind of thing I expected from someone like him. I thanked him, and he brushed it off, saying it was just money he earned from scraping together small amounts to pay his subscription fee. Then another viewer, Soupman, jumped in and told him not to waste money earned through hardship and suggested he should just buy himself a bowl of soup instead. I never appreciated people interfering with someone else's choices like that. I continued covering monsters anyway. I talked about goblins and kobolds and warned everyone that bone creepers had to be avoided at all costs. Still, the most dangerous creatures in the forest were the werewolves and the owlbears. If an owlbear had claimed territory, it meant the ecosystem was balanced. Nothing in that area dared challenge it. Looking back on those times felt strangely beautiful. I genuinely loved those days. There was Pitiful Man, always reacting passionately, and Soup Man, who found a way to compare everything to soup. Even the chaotic barking dog of a viewer, who changed his nickname every 10 seconds just to make me laugh. I even explained strategies on how to deal with an owlbear. But thinking about all that suddenly made me wonder why those memories were surfacing now. Was this what people meant when they talked about their life flashing before their eyes? Because at that moment, it felt like the owlbear in front of me was going to kill me. No, maybe it wasn't a death flashback. It felt more like old friends shaking me awake, telling me to get it together. I forced myself to think clearly. Owlbears tore apart anything in sight when hungry, but this one was standing still, which meant it wasn't starving. There was only one explanation. I had trespassed into its territory, where the red trout lived, and if I wanted to escape this situation, there was only one option left. My mind still felt like Kimbaplover, but my body was Kong Song-ho. If I wanted to survive, I had to act. I yelled to provoke the monster. Its eyes glowed red with anger, and then it charged. Owlbears, with their owl heads, had excellent night vision, but they were vulnerable to sunlight. I had memorized their attack patterns long ago. All I needed to do was execute the plan. There was only a single window of timing, and the only way to create a strong light effect in that situation was by shining it directly into the owlbear's eyes. The moment the opportunity appeared, I took it. The owlbear was completely stunned and let out a violent scream. It clearly caused it a lot of pain. When I came to, I was already back home, and my entire body was aching. I wondered if I had passed out the moment I exited the portal. It made sense. Not only had I fought a goblin, but an owlbear as well. I swore I never wanted to face one again. Then I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. My legs were shaking, completely drained of strength. Thanks to the sun apple, my stamina slowly recovered, and I finally felt somewhat alive again. I figured I should at least get something to eat. But when I stepped outside, I was surprised to see Miss Mi Kyung there. She casually explained that she came to eat because my restaurant was second place in her personal rankings, but that wasn't what I was asking. Before I could clarify, she brushed past it and said it was nice to have someone to share a meal with. She then asked if I had tried what we talked about last time, clearly referring to the status window. I finally understood why she had stopped herself from saying something the other day. She continued showing me more strange events happening around the world, and I couldn't tell if she was being naive or just genuinely innocent. It was painfully obvious what she wanted to confirm. I simply laughed it off and told her that I had tried, but nothing appeared. Lying felt like the only logical choice. Not only was my trait not a combat ability, but it was something suited for individual use rather than teamwork. Revealing any information without securing safety was basically asking to be eaten alive once the apocalypse began. Even so, the fact that Miss Mi Kyung was asking specifically about awakening suggested there was more behind her question. Then she hesitated and admitted that there was something she had lied about. I knew she seemed like a genuinely kind person, but I still told her she didn't need to say anything right now, that there was still time, and she could tell me later when she gathered the courage. After that, I headed home. Deliveries were already piling up in front of my house. Just as expected from the delivery company, the supplies I ordered were finally arriving one by one. I even thanked the courier, acknowledging how hard he was working. The courier responded politely, insisting he was only doing his job. I moved the items I would need later up to the roof and took the ones I needed immediately to the second floor. Riding that momentum, I selected the gear for the day's operation: a gas mask, a flame-resistant suit, self-defense spray, a fire axe, a small gasoline can, a length of plumbing pipe, a portable telescope, and a portable fire extinguisher. My mission for the day was to secure a space that could serve as a hideout. I absolutely needed one. Finding the location wasn't difficult because I had already come across a suspicious spot while searching for the old goblin. It looked perfect for a hideout, and the only thing left to figure out was which monster lived there. I soon recognized kobold footprints. The realization actually made me smile. My plan worked on all low-level monsters, and kobolds were nocturnal, meaning they would be asleep. It would be like using rat poison. I hurriedly gathered firewood, which turned out to be tougher than expected, and stacked it at the entrance. Once I thought it was enough, I poured gasoline over it. All that was left was to ignite it, but before I could, a few kobolds emerged. They looked startled, and I only had a second to react. I grabbed the axe, rushed them, and took them out. Afterward, I wondered whether intimidation counted as a status effect and whether a one-turn kill was still possible. A notification told me my level had increased to 1 and I had gained 4 points. I decided I could figure out the details later and needed to move quickly before more kobolds woke up. I ignited the fire immediately. In the game Fiola, all lower-tier monsters shared a common weakness. They were vulnerable to sudden environmental changes. Burning them directly would have been more effective than smoke, but from the perspective of someone who planned to live there afterward, cleaning up charred corpses would be a nightmare. So my strategy was to confuse them with smoke, force them into a weakened state, and then take them down as they stumbled out. Kobolds usually lived in packs of 7, so I expected 5 more to emerge, but that didn't happen. After the ones I already fought, only 3 were left. I decided to go inside myself since I felt confident I could finish off the remaining kobolds. I swung my axe and took them down one by one. At one point, I even used the self-defense spray, which went straight into a kobold's eyes. Soon, only one was left, a leader trembling in fear. I couldn't believe a boss-type monster was scared like that, but I finished it off without hesitation. With that, the hideout was officially mine, and I even felt oddly grateful while securing it. Although everything went smoothly, the process was exhausting. My stamina was completely drained, and it felt just like the game. My abilities were practically nerfed from the exhaustion effect, and I still didn't receive status points even after leveling up. Still, since convenience systems unlocked with level-ups, the day's results were huge. Most importantly, I now had a safe space that only I could fully rely on. The next step was obvious. I needed to clean out the nest. After securing the hideout, I began cleaning right away. It was about 15 meters deep and unbelievably filthy. The space was on the smaller side for a hideout, but maybe because I had just finished a major fight, the whole process felt like absolute torture. I couldn't believe how disgusting those kobolds were. So much cleanup, and yet they lived like civilized creatures. Still, having a safe space in the other world opened up a lot of possibilities. Being able to use the portal freely made things easier, at least in terms of moving supplies. However, everything else was far from easy. I was exhausted to the point where I felt like I might pass out. My life honestly felt miserable. The most shocking discovery during my travel between dimensions was that I could fix the coordinates between the other world and reality, and that even when an object existed halfway between both worlds, I could still interact with it. It was insane, but it actually worked. After cleaning, the hideout looked decent enough. I still needed to wipe away bloodstains and pour concrete on the floor so I could stack supplies properly. The mortar work alone would take a few days. After that would come the sandwich panels. I began gathering materials like lumix stone and igneous stone, essential items for new players in Seata. Felt like I had stumbled onto a complete gold mine. I figured I should start mining once the construction preparations were finished. The next day, D29, I was completely worn out. I wondered if I had pushed myself too hard because every part of my body was aching. Then I noticed a few cuts I didn't even remember getting. They weren't serious enough to waste a sun apple just to test its healing effect, so I considered making ointment instead. The method was incredibly simple. Mix guava powder and vegetable oil in equal amounts and stir until it thickened. A notification confirmed that I had acquired usable ointment, which slightly healed wounds. For someone used to kitchen work, making it was nothing. It definitely felt like it was helping, but if things continued like this every day, it would be too much. If raising my stats required this level of suffering, I felt like I might die before the actual catastrophe arrived. I began thinking that maybe a sling, less affected by terrain than a bow, or even a gun would allow me to take down 1 or 2 enemies safely. Then something came to mind. It wasn't part of the main storyline in Seata, just a piece of backstory. I wasn't sure if it would happen in reality, but even so, the information wasn't useless. If the same precursor events appeared here as in the game's lore, it could help in several ways. So I decided it was worth investigating. After making my plan, I went up to the rooftop to begin the construction work as scheduled. It felt good knowing I had already moved everything up there at dawn. Fortunately, The extra bags of mortar I ordered the previous night had been delivered and stacked, so the work went smoothly. I went down to the first floor to pick up more packages, and just as I was about to start moving them, I heard someone calling my name. It was Mikyung, greeting me with a casual "good afternoon." I couldn't help wondering if we had gotten closer since even the way she addressed me had changed. I mentioned that I seemed to be seeing her often lately, and she looked a little embarrassed, admitting that she had actually been coming every day to eat tekkbokki. She was right, I hadn't been thinking straight lately. I apologized, explaining that I had been busy with the remodeling. She said she could tell, and then reminded me that I normally only came in for a haircut once every 3 months. Hearing that made me realize she was right. She then offered to cut my hair since we were already talking about it. I needed it trimmed anyway for exploration purposes, so I agreed. When she asked how I wanted it done, I told her to shave it all off, which clearly surprised her. I explained that I wanted it as a sign of a fresh start. She accepted that and said she would make it look as good as possible. While cutting, she commented that my shoulders looked broader than before. I told her it must have been because I recently started exercising and that it seemed to be paying off, but she hesitated and suggested it wasn't just from exercise. She told me she had heard somewhere that the status window was related to survival life and that the awakened were supposedly people who had played the game at least once. I was genuinely surprised but tried to play it off casually, then asked her where she got that information. Before she could answer, another customer walked in, Owen Heck. She addressed him by name and asked why he was there at that time, and he replied that he had come to share information. His trait apparently showed up as head. He was the same person who had once gotten into a fight with me over loud singing, the tow truck driver who turned out to be Mikyung's source. He explained that the person spreading the rumor seemed to be hoarding information and even deleted his videos before disappearing. Mikyung reacted with shock when she heard that someone had deleted their videos and disappeared, and the moment she said it, I realized she was unknowingly talking about me. The tow truck guy explained that their group was currently trying to track down where that person lived. Mikyung pointed out that doing something like that was illegal, but he brushed it off, saying they weren't in any position to be picky and that catching the so-called kimbap lover bastard and sharing the information would supposedly benefit the public. From the very first word, something about the conversation felt wrong, but it became clear they were actually looking for me. The tow truck guy even tried to recruit Mikyung into his team, though she turned him down for the time being. The whole situation was absurd. I had only deleted my videos after getting hit with reality, not because I was trying to monopolize anything. I didn't even have the time to think about such nonsense. Watching him hover close to Mikyung made my skin crawl. He acted like he knew everything, and it was disgusting. He complained that if that person, meaning me, had just uploaded the information, things wouldn't have turned out like this. Hearing that made it sound like I owed them money. I began to wonder whether the community really was filled with insults about me. If that was the case, should I share information after all? As the tow truck guy pushed Mikyung to hurry up with her decision, I stepped in and told him we could talk later. He spun around and demanded to know who I thought I was, so I stared him down and warned him to leave while I was still being polite, unless he wanted to end up flushed red like last time. He backed off, clearly shaken, and left. Mikyung looked visibly relieved. I suggested that we exchange numbers, just in case he caused trouble later, and she agreed. When I got home, I paused the construction work and turned on my computer. I searched for kimbap lover under the accusation of information hoarding. The real-time boards were in chaos. People were posting things like how I had really deleted all my videos and disappeared, demanding to know where I had run off to. Some called me a terrible person and said that if my address ever surfaced, they were going to come after me. Others even offered money to any hackers willing to dox me. The situation had completely spiraled out of control. Someone on the forum pointed out that other veterans were the same as me, but another user immediately argued back, saying I was different because I had recorded everything and played until the very end. The entire community was flooded with insults directed at me, and even an unknown person who had been releasing important early game information was getting cursed out. The early tips being shared explained that if zombie spores covered an area, the metal death plague would arrive 5 hours later. It warned that buildings without structural defects were still safe up to the 7th or 8th floor even if the rebar crumbled, and that zombies had excellent perception, so people shouldn't move in groups and should avoid light as much as possible. It also mentioned that smashing the host of the zombie spore in the center of the head could counter them. In the replies, people mocked the poster, threatening them and demanding they prove their location or show their playtime before posting anything else. Soon after, I saw an ID that was clearly that tow truck guy. The name was Towing, as if he had made his username while confirming his real identity. The posts were overflowing with insults toward kimbap lover, and some even hinted at trying something involving Mikyung. Feeling disgusted by the whole thing, I turned off the computer. My mental state gate didn't collapse, but I was sick of all of them. Strangely, instead of feeling overwhelmed, my mind felt sharper and clearer than before. I opened the portal and spent the next 2 days throwing myself into work on the hideout, using labor as a way to burn off the stress. I mined Lumic stone and igneous rock with a pickaxe, mixed mortar with water, poured it, and spread it evenly across the floor. After finishing the work for the day, I stepped outside to let the mortar dry. While I was staring at the moon hanging in the darkness, a thought came to me. If injustice was being thrown at me, then I could respond in kind. I wasn't a hero, just one person, so I didn't need to feel any sense of duty. In the end, the only thing that mattered was my own survival. I had just made that resolution and turned around when I noticed something. I realized a bone creeper had appeared out of nowhere. I only survived because by the time I registered its presence, it was already on the verge of exploding, and I managed to barely put some distance between us. The proof was all over me, and I could already tell the aftermath was going to be painful. I needed to check the status window immediately. My stats had taken a heavy hit, but at least nothing was fractured or ruptured, which was a relief. Since my level and points had increased, it seemed like the system counted the bone creeper as defeated, just like in the game. My head wasn't functioning properly anymore. I opened the portal right away and started treating myself. Removing the bone fragments was agonizing. Every movement burned. After applying the ointment made from guava powder to stop the bleeding, I tried to bandage the wounds and check my condition, but I ended up falling asleep on the spot as if I had just fainted. When morning came, the realization hit me that I was going to die at this rate. I should have at least confirmed whether the first aid had worked before passing out. But after checking the status window, I felt some relief. My treatment had taken effect properly. I still couldn't understand where the bone creeper had suddenly come from. Then again, the forest was enormous, and something appearing out of nowhere wasn't exactly strange. I began wondering if I should raise my perception stat to improve my detection ability. In Seola, there were 2 ways to increase stats, earning them through experience or obtaining items with stats attached. But the game was brutally hardcore. To get stat-boosting items, you either had to defeat monsters stronger than your current stats or rely on event-related drops. I had already gone through the same struggle a dozen times, begging the system for agility even though everything was random, and finally receiving a skill according to the notification. Most of the time, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't win. High-ranking monsters had skills that could be acquired if the conditions were met, but the one I obtained didn't suit me at all. That left the question of where I could obtain useful items in my current situation. To find the answer, I decided to revisit the backstory footage I had recorded earlier. The backstory described several precursor phenomena that occurred before Nzambi fell. If everything lined up the same way in reality, there was a chance I could acquire items before the apocalypse even arrived, but only if both assumptions were true, that the precursor events were happening for real, and that the same powerful monsters would appear exactly as they did in the game. After reading through the backstory for quite a long time, I learned that a total of 3 precursor phenomena took place. The Russian ship incident was the final one. Before that was the Hobgoblin, but there was almost no information about it. However, in an entry dated July 26th, it mentioned that an orc corpse had been found near the Yungsanri campground on Mount Yuri. The report had been leaked by a media outlet that broke the embargo, and the government, afraid of mass panic, deleted the articles almost immediately. Because of that, hardly anyone knew about the incident except those directly involved. If the Mount Yuri orc event was the earliest, and the corpse had been discovered on the afternoon of the 26th, then I would need to leave on the night of the 25th and arrive at dawn, while that creature was still alive. I needed to prepare quickly. Just then, I received a call from Miss Mikyung. I wondered why she was contacting me at that hour. When she saw my expression, she looked slightly suspicious, but I forced a smile and told her that I simply didn't get hot easily, which was why I was dressed like that. She was sharper than I had initially realized. She mentioned that the haircut had taken longer last time because of Owen Hack, but I assured her that wasn't the case, which seemed to ease her mind. She admitted she had actually been a little scared. I laughed it off but told her that I genuinely disliked that guy. I reminded her of last winter, when he caused trouble with his illegally modified tow truck and picked fights with frail elderly people. His personality was awful. She was shocked and said she had no idea he was that kind of person, but I explained that he pulled stunts like that every dawn. I then asked why she had called me that day. She hesitated and asked if she could speak to me privately. She leaned in close and whispered into my ear that she was actually awakened. Even after hearing it, I was completely confused. I couldn't understand why she was telling me something like that. I figured it was best to just play along for now, so I forced a laugh and told her I was envious and hadn't awakened yet. She apologized, saying saying she had felt guilty for lying earlier. I reassured her that I didn't misunderstand anything and that it was fine. I told her I knew she wasn't the type of person to deceive others, and thanked her for consistently sharing information with me. I decided to wrap up the conversation and stood to leave. I mentioned that I actually felt a little better thanks to her, since my nerves had been on edge because of the remote situation, and that I was glad she had stopped by. She said she planned to start studying survival life as well. I found myself thinking that meeting someone with decent character really made a difference. I genuinely felt lighter. After she left, I checked my phone again and looked into getting a state-of-the-art drone to scout the forest. I also rented a car for the remaining period and went to sleep early so I could be in the best condition. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I began preparing materials for hunting the orc. Crushing the ignis stone into small fragments required extreme caution. If struck incorrectly, it would flare up into flames. Then I worked on the luminescent stone, which burst with light every so often and stung my eyes. Still, the performance seemed reliable, so I endured it. Once I completed the basic setup, I mixed sugar, gasoline, and various organic solvents in order. I added a hardener to solidify the ignis stone powder and resin. At the spot where I had fixed the portal coordinates, I installed a makeshift desk and then returned to reality. It was a pleasant surprise to see the car I had rented waiting. It felt like a good decision to splurge on something reliable. I packed everything I needed. With preparations complete, it was time to head for Mount Yuri, where the orc was destined to appear. Before midnight, I arrived at the Yungsanri camping ground parking lot and spent the remaining time running through image training in my head. As soon as the next day began, I checked my gear one last time and started the search in earnest. 2 hours later, the rain had intensified and the mist made it difficult to see anything ahead. I kept wondering where the orc was supposed to appear. I had thoroughly searched the campground, and for a moment I assumed that, unlike in the game, precursor phenomena simply didn't happen in reality. But just as that thought crossed my mind, something happened. I heard a sound. I recognized immediately that it belonged to an orc, and it sounded furious. Judging from the tone, it was a subspecies of a red orc. If that was the case, there was a high chance of a guaranteed skill drop. I kept reminding myself to stay calm. As long as I followed the plan, I felt confident I could take it down. My strategy for handling an orc was straightforward. First, I needed to trigger its aggression and draw its focus. After that, I would use the signal flare to immobilize it briefly. The moment it paused to react, I would open the portal and throw in the flash can. The creature wouldn't regain its vision for about 20 seconds, and I would need to make my next moves within that window. From that point onward, it became a race against time. I targeted its muscles, weakened from the status effect, to restrict its movement. The orc kept trying desperately to attack, but I dodged repeatedly, striking whenever I saw an opening. Even though the weather made visibility almost non-existent, I continued fighting. When my eye level finally aligned with the orc's, I used the flame can I had prepared and forced it into its maw. The explosion was massive, and I assumed that had been enough to finish it. But when I lowered my guard for just a moment, I saw that the orc was still standing, engulfed in flames. I hadn't expected that at all and wondered if I was going to be killed right there. Then a notification appeared, informing me that my level had increased to 3 and I had gained 10 points. Another message announced that I had acquired the skill Survival Instinct. The orc eventually collapsed, but the fight had pushed me far past my limits. I couldn't keep handling things like this. I began searching for the dropped item and eventually located it. The rain had almost concealed it, but I found a watch that transformed upon activation and increased my perception. Now that I had secured it, a new problem surfaced. I had no idea what to do with the orc's body. The Mount Yuri orc incident was definitely under embargo, and I kept questioning whether releasing that information was the right thing to do. Honestly, I felt pessimistic, especially after remembering what Miss Meekyoung had told me, that if it was true awakened people were those who had played the game at least once, then there were probably several thousand awakened already. And if even a fraction of them were like that tow truck guy, Owen Hack, then there was a real possibility that they would tear apart the system and the law for personal gain and incite chaos. The biggest problem was that if I abandoned the orc's body, it would turn into a bone creeper and start harming people as early as the next day. Then another thought hit me. Why hadn't I considered that I could become a zombie myself? Even being awakened didn't guarantee immunity. If I were infected by spores, there was no assurance I wouldn't turn. I couldn't make a decision right then. But one thing was certain. For the sake of the few who would survive, the world needed to face an orderly end. Meanwhile, I still had the problem in front of me. I needed to bury that body, and my injured condition made the task almost impossible. If my body were fine, I wouldn't be living this miserable, dog-tired life. Then a notification triggered, saying that survival instinct had activated due to exhaustion, boosting will to fight, stamina regeneration, health recovery, and perception. The surge gave me confidence. I told myself I just needed to finish everything quickly. I had no choice but to move as fast as possible. At first glance, survival instinct looked like a broken, overpowered skill, but once the effect wore off, I'd be helpless. I had to hurry home. If I arrived too late, I might be killed by something while unable to move. After some time passed, I checked the schedule in my head and realized that by now, I should have already been constructing the defensive line. Still, the traces of the Red Orc should have disappeared by then, right? The news reported only that mysterious heavy rain had fallen from dawn until morning at Mount Yuri. Experts, including Professor Kim Woo-seon from the Department of Environmental Engineering at Horia University, expressed concern that abnormal weather patterns were increasing, phenomena that couldn't be explained by existing climate data. After that whole ordeal, it felt like an awkward time to do anything productive, so I decided to check the community and look through the goods that had arrived earlier that morning. I was genuinely happy when I saw what had been delivered. In reality, I could only use the Indian War Club for now, but since I could use everything freely in the other world, it wasn't a bad outcome. However, I noticed a few items were missing and wondered what happened. Then I read the notice explaining that customs clearance had been denied for some of the weapons I ordered, including the spear, because they were classified as heavy weapons. It figured, even with a weapon importer, some things still got caught in customs. Just then, I heard another sound and assumed it was another delivery. I called out to the driver to leave the package at the door, but the knocking continued. I wondered if he hadn't heard me. When I opened the door to repeat myself, I realized it wasn't a delivery at all. It was Mikyung. I had no idea why she was there, but she apologized and said it had been a while since we talked, and she really wanted to see me today. She asked if I was free and suggested we eat ribaki together. So now Miss Mikyung was inside my house. Felt absurd, and for a moment I wondered if this was really happening. She urged me to sit down and start eating, and I obeyed without hesitation. Even then, I couldn't help questioning what she actually wanted. She reminded me that I had said I would look up information about Seola last time, and she explained that she wanted to share what she had found. At that moment, all I could do was lament internally. Of course, right when the end of the world was approaching, any chance of romance vanished. Still, because it was Miss Mikyung, I felt I owed her honesty. Good people were rare, and the apocalypse would need them. After we finished eating, she stepped out to throw away the trash, and I used the time to prepare. While she was gone, I brought out my laptop. The community was still the best place to reference if I wanted to explain information without revealing I was awakened. I began by explaining the details of the metal death plague. I told her that traveling in groups of 6 or more increased the likelihood of being detected by zombies and monsters, and that perception was one of the most important stats for survival. She wrote down everything carefully. Her notes included points like sturdy buildings being safe up to the 8th floor, the need to stockpile canned food, the danger of moving in large groups, and the importance of perception. She seemed to understand it well and commented that survival had always been the core goal of the game. I started to move on to the next topic, but she brought up something else. She mentioned that, just like Owen Hack had said, Kimbap Lover was being heavily criticized online. I acknowledged it, and she asked why Kimbap Lover wasn't sharing information. I dodged the question, saying that as someone who hadn't played the game, I had no idea, and asked if she had any guesses. She thought about it and said she could somewhat understand. Everyone had their own reasons and circumstances. She also mentioned rejecting Owen Hack's offer to join his party. When I asked why, she explained that she had met his party members once, and they were terrible. She showed me recordings of them speaking about her in disgusting ways, talking as if she were playing hard to get, suggesting kidnapping her, and telling each other to wait because she was bound to show up eventually. The more I listened, the clearer it became why she had refused them, and why trusting the wrong people in the apocalypse could be fatal. She explained that the party leader had been speaking horribly about her, and hearing that made my blood boil. I called him trash in my mind, but out loud I tried to keep calm and told her that if the catastrophe really came and the rule of law collapsed, many people would reveal their true natures, so she shouldn't trust anyone too easily. But then she suddenly asked what she should do about me and said she wanted to form a party with me. I was completely taken off guard and didn't know how to respond. One of my goals was to reach level 10 and unlock the shop before the tutorial ended, and that created a problem. In Seola, monster respawn ranks increased based on player level, which meant that if she followed me around, she would almost certainly die. So I told her that I appreciated the offer, but asked what she would do if I turned into a zombie. She said she wasn't worried and revealed her trait, blink. She explained that she could simply dodge before I ever managed to bite her. Seeing that ability shocked me. I told her she shouldn't reveal something so important so casually, but she said she showed me because she trusted me. Even if we couldn't form a party, she hoped we could still cooperate as long as both of us survived. After that, I focused on building the fence. The process wasn't difficult. I hammered support posts into the ground, wrapped barbed wire around them once or twice, secured everything firmly, and then installed infrared sensors. The result looked impressive, and I couldn't help thinking I deserved at least 1 point in dexterity for it. Once the mortar had finished setting and the defensive line was complete, I began moving the remaining packages. With those in place, all I needed to do was divide the interior using sandwich panels to finalize the layout. Then I suddenly sneezed hard. The other world was much colder than I expected. Felt like late autumn. Eventually, I would have to sleep there, so I needed countermeasures. While I was at it, I decided to replace the blackout curtain at the entrance with a proper door. I stopped by a nearby woodworking shop to request the construction and buy additional materials. As I left, I asked the craftsman to handle it well, though it felt like my to-do list had only grown longer. On the way back, I walked while checking the places I planned to loot during the 5 hours before the metal death plague would spread. First the hardware store, then the pharmacy, and after that the motorcycle shop. While I was muttering to myself, someone suddenly called out to me. It was Hyung Jun Hyung. It had been a long time since we last met. He was the director of a gym, known as the Protein Monster, recently divorced with a young daughter. I noticed his expression looked terrible and asked if something was wrong. He brushed it off and asked if I had started working out again, saying his muscle memory was coming back. I just laughed and told him I had been using my body more lately because of remodeling. I asked what was going on with him, and he said it was nothing new, just that it really seemed like the world was about to end. I told him I had heard about it too. He explained that a gym member had told him about the status window and something about zombies. He asked if I believed it, and before I could answer, he continued. He said he hadn't believed it at first either, but then his friend told him to watch closely and suddenly levitated. That was when he accepted it was real. Even he called it 100% a superpower. I told him I hadn't awakened, and he said he hadn't either. Then he mentioned that the guy who levitated was planning to go to a broadcast station to make money off it. I wondered how he made that connection, but he said he didn't know, just that the guy claimed to have a meeting lined up. I sat down with him and said that meant ordinary people would soon find out about the existence of the awakened. But he told me something more concerning had happened that day. I was curious, and he explained that there had been a shootout, specifically in Uedo. Couldn't believe it. I hadn't watched the news because I had been doing other things, so I checked the petition board online. There was a post demanding the truth about the Uedo shootout. It stated that someone had clearly seen breaking news reporting a shootout in Uedo around 9:36 a.m. that morning, but shortly afterward the breaking news vanished. All articles and community posts were deleted as if nothing had ever happened. The writer accused the government of media control and requested clarification from President Jang, one take about what really occurred. Many of the comments on the petition were agreeing, and after seeing it myself, I could only think that it was insane, actual media control. Hyung said he almost fainted watching the breaking news disappear in real time. Since everything he was saying felt increasingly serious, I asked him to tell me more. He explained that officials were trying to cover it up by saying it was a shooting caused by a military deserter, but even he didn't buy that excuse. It wasn't the kind of situation where you would immediately pull breaking news off the air. He also said the entire Uedo area had been closed off by the military and police, which made it obvious that something was being hidden. Before he could continue, I suddenly got up and started running, telling him I had just remembered something urgent and would visit next time. He yelled after me, demanding protein if I wanted to hear more. When I got home, I spent a long time organizing my thoughts. A shootout had happened just one day after the Orc incident ended, along with a coordinated media blackout. That meant the government already knew about the situation. But how? There shouldn't be many people who knew the exact timing of the first precursor phenomenon. I had buried the red orc beyond the dimension specifically because I wanted the world to have an orderly end. Yet a shootout still occurred at this exact timing. It might have been overthinking things, but a possibility formed in my mind. What if someone had leaked information to the government early, and they intended to take action starting with the first precursor phenomenon? And what if that person didn't have an offensive trait, someone like me, so they stayed hidden instead of acting directly? I couldn't be sure who it was, but one thing felt certain. Behind the government, someone was moving. I kept wondering who that person could be. I narrowed the possible mastermind down to the creator of Survival Life and the 3 veteran players. After thinking it through, I ruled out the creator. I had no idea how they had pulled any of this off, but the fact that the end of the game was happening in reality made the people who built the world and the system the most likely villains. Besides, if the creator were backed by the government, they wouldn't have let me kill an orc in the first place. So for now, the 3 veterans seemed like the most realistic suspects. If that was true, then maybe it really was Survivor 1. And if my theory was correct, didn't that mean I didn't need to share information with the government myself? Even then, I wasn't sure. I acted differently in the game than I did in real life, so would the real person behind Survivor 1 be the same as the one I knew? Still, I couldn't help missing my veteran friends. We had a lot of fun back then. In the end, I decided to trust them for now. Sharing information wouldn't stop a catastrophe anyway. If the world needed an orderly end, it wasn't my time to interfere yet. 2 days later, I completed organizing the food supplies. The first shelter setup was finished before the generator arrived. I now had food storage and an armory. For Phase 2, I planned to install steel logistics trays and drill through the wall with a hammer drill. Turned out there was much less space than I expected. The basement waterproofing was finished since I had been working on it bit by bit, but until it fully cured, I couldn't store anything down there. I decided I would figure out the rest during Phase 2 construction. For now, there was something more important. The drone I bought was unbelievably large, basically Amazon level, and completely overpowered. I didn't have to worry about getting ambushed while exploring, and making real-time maps was effortless. It was god tier. I was relieved I had gone for the expensive model. After a brief moment of admiration, I set the shelter as the center point and began full-scale terrain exploration. I discovered perpetual snowfields to the northwest, although there was some signal interference, and an ocean to the south. The ocean had no monsters and plenty of prey. I figured I should go there later and set up fish traps. Once the terrain scouting was complete, I examined the valley and studied the ecosystem around the shelter. Thankfully, there were no owl bears. Then I reached the place where I had encountered the owl bear before, only to find that the corpse was gone. I wondered if that huge furball had eaten it. The creep I had seen back then definitely wasn't from goblin bones. Still, judging from the multiple footprints, it was too early to conclude anything. Some of them were goblin tracks, which only made things more suspicious. The shelter was about 1.5 kilometers from the valley, and that distance suggested the shelter might be more dangerous than I originally thought. If goblins were nearby, that changed everything. I pressed the RTN Return to Home button on the drone. I couldn't afford to lose my gold and treasure. Even during the return flight, the drone continued relaying information about the forest ecosystem. I identified a swamp zone, along with boars, deer, and rabbits. So now I at least had a rough understanding of the terrain and wildlife. The next step was checking each area myself. That was the only way to get detailed information. I decided to start with the closest swamp to see if farming would even be possible there. Just then, I heard something, the infrared detector. Perfect timing. Goblins showed up as if summoned by my thoughts. They really didn't have any manners. It didn't look like a full group, maybe 6 to 8, probably out hunting. They were already on my mind, so them walking straight toward me felt like a gift. Maybe it was because my perception stat had increased, but every small sound felt louder than usual. I managed to spot them while hiding my presence. They were fighting over food. It seemed like they never learned. The angle was perfect for an ambush. I readied my bow and fired, landing a clean headshot on the leader. It dropped instantly, shocking the rest. They started panicking and shouting to look out for the intruder, but I headshot another one before they could react. The remaining goblins rushed toward me, so I switched to my axe and took them down one after another. That made 4 down. I waited to see what the rest would do. They tried to get a shot at me with their darts. Even villains usually wait when someone is talking. These guys were just rude. My armor and helmet blocked the poison. Realizing the darts didn't work, the goblins started screaming like maniacs and surrounded me, switching to melee combat. Honestly, they were smarter than I gave them credit for. It was the right choice for them, at least. For me, things were simple. I just pushed forward. It looked like the status effect had applied perfectly. I decided it was time to finish things. After taking down the remaining goblins, a notification appeared, informing me that I had leveled up to 4 and gained 16 points. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I had only attempted it because they were weakened from the confusion status, but surprisingly, it actually worked. I was exhausted. It was almost funny that survival instinct didn't trigger during the battle, but activated while I was digging. The efficiency boost was ridiculous, but I wasn't going to complain. It made the job easier. At least the activation wasn't useless. Unlike with the orc, only my health stat had dropped this time, so I confirmed that the recoil wasn't severe. Once the burial was was finally done, I checked the loot. There was guava fruit which restored health. I realized this was what it looked like before being ground into powder. Judging from the amount of vegetable oil I'd seen, there was probably a place nearby where it could be harvested. Then I checked the boss goblin's pouch and found something unexpected, a live toad. I wondered why they would carry a living one instead of a dead one. The musty smell and the unpleasant green liquid made it obvious. It was the paralysis poison goblins used. I knew immediately that I had to raise it. More than anything, it was strangely cute. If I could extract paralysis poison myself, I'd have opportunities to build up poison resistance, and hunting would become much easier. I decided to name it Jadok and promised it plenty of food. A notification appeared, saying that because it was asleep, I had forcibly succeeded in empathizing with the poison toad, and that Jadok would now be considered my property. I was genuinely stunned. I had never seen anything like this in Seola. I didn't know if it was some hidden gimmick added in reality, like the dimensional gate properties. Another notification followed, stating that survival life would be completely terminated in 1 week and thanking users for their support. Apparently, an update had been conducted during the final week when I wasn't logged in. It felt absurd. Who pushed an update right before shutting down the servers? I decided to stop thinking about it for now. I needed to focus on exploration. After reorganizing things by going back and forth through the dimensional gate, I began searching the surrounding area and discovered a spring I hadn't been able to see even with the drone. I couldn't believe it. There was something like this so close to the hideout. The spring water turned out to be completely normal, which was a relief. That solved the drinking water problem, meaning I didn't need to rush to the swamp right away. Just as I expected, there were other resources nearby: guava trees, vegetable oil plants, and new buds. I hurried to pick as many guava fruits as I could and harvested a reasonable amount of vegetable oil, leaving one source untouched just in case. I placed markers everywhere so I wouldn't forget the path back. After that, I headed home and fed Jadok, telling him to open wide. For now, I decided to raise him on the second floor of my house. Watching him eat well and hop around made me unexpectedly happy. Since toads live in environments around 18 to 25 degrees, leaving him in the hideout without heating would have killed him, but he was too cute to risk it. He produced all the paralysis poison I needed without any trouble. Aside from taking care of Jadok, there was still a mountain of work left. The most time-consuming task was making ointment. Somehow, I ended up making way too much. Even though I had large hands, there was no way I could give it to Mikyung. She was awakened, so I couldn't be careless. I had no idea what to do with the excess until I remembered Hyungjun. Later, when I visited him, he was thrilled and joked that protein drinks delivered by a younger brother were the ultimate truth. I laughed and apologized for being late. He said it was fine but admitted he had expected me the next day and felt a little disappointed. I told him I came with both hands full, and even he was surprised to see an entire container of protein powder. He noticed the ointment and asked about it. I explained that I had bought too much and that it was supposed to be good for wounds. He asked if I had gotten into multi-level marketing, and I told him I wasn't that foolish. He thanked me for sending Seola-related information through messages, and I told him I was the one who should be grateful. Without him, I wouldn't have known about the shootout. I asked why the gym was so quiet, and he explained that everyone had gone to make plans. I asked what kind of plans, and he said the guy who went to the broadcasting station had shared information with the members before leaving. At their request, they decided to turn the gym into a base. There were about 20 people gathered, and I couldn't help reacting. I asked Hyung if he had even read the information properly. Having more than 6 people together was dangerous. He said there was nothing they could do and that they had to try somehow, since they couldn't abandon their gym members. As expected, he was loyal despite how he looked. Then he asked what I planned to do. I told him I still needed time to think. He reminded me that I was also a non-awakened and said that if I ever had nowhere to go. But before he finished, a scream rang out. Hyung froze, asking if that was really a scream. I rushed toward the window and told him to open it. When we looked down, we saw Mikyung collapsed on the ground. Later, when she slowly opened her eyes, I asked if she was conscious. She looked at me in confusion and asked why she was there. I wanted to ask her the same thing. I asked if she remembered anything happening. She said her memory was fuzzy. Someone had suddenly attacked her. Hyung exploded in anger, cursing whoever did it. Then he told me to stay with the members. I stared at him, wondering what he meant, and tried to calm him down, saying we needed to assess the situation first. He insisted he would check the entire area. I was panicking a little myself, but I focused and asked Mikyung Young if she remembered what the attacker looked like. She said she couldn't. Everything had suddenly gone dark. That surprised me. She clarified that it wasn't like someone covered her eyes. The world itself just disappeared. That's when it hit me. They had already started moving. I immediately told her that if anything like this happened again, she needed to use Blink right away. She seemed confused, but I insisted. I told her I would send her self-defense equipment and that she needed to carry it at all times. From now on, she had to be extremely careful, because the whole world was going to come after anyone who had something valuable. From a long time ago, there's been a famous meme: if 5 people gather, one of them is definitely trash. And it's true, trolls exist everywhere. Especially in Sura, where there was no intervention aside from purchases. It was even worse. I constantly filed reports and customer support would respond, but they never actually punished anyone. Trolls would join a team while pretending to be normal players. They'd act confident, saying they knew the area inside out and told everyone to follow them. Other players would trust them, only to be led straight into a monster-infested zone and wiped out. They'd approach newbies while pretending to be kind, offering to carry them. The newbies would get excited, thinking the troll was a good person. But the whole time, the troll had a weapon hidden behind their back, waiting to kill them and steal their items, calling them idiots afterward for falling for it. They did every bizarre thing imaginable, creating conflicts between parties just to watch them fight while laughing from behind. With antics like that, the already unpopular game bled users even faster and completely failed within a year. Of course, the reason the concurrent users dropped to 4 was also because we cracked down hard on the few remaining troublemakers. But why am I suddenly talking about this? Because the timing couldn't be more perfect for trolls to run wild again. To summarize everything I've found so far, after the Yoido shootout, the Awakener communities merged. People started repairing, preparing for the end, sharing information, but also plotting. On the real-time boards, I saw people recruiting parties for the Seoul, Gyeonggi area, others talking about robbing a bank using psychic abilities, and some even posting gameplay clips to recruit weakness-type healers. There were even people selling my videos. It was insane. And then I noticed one bastard, Duwaijin, was definitely a troll. He posted, selling footage of Kimbap lover carrying me during my newbie days. Contact via 1:1 message. But I don't even remember ever carrying anyone. Is he just splicing random clips together to bait as many people as possible? Wow, that was incredibly respectable. I couldn't understand how his mind worked like that. Was there even a way to fight back against guys like that? I figured I needed to increase my training time. For the next 13 days, whenever I had a moment, I kept learning weapon usage and techniques that could be applied in real combat from Survival MeTube. Up until now, most of what I had seen was focused on attacking monsters or defending the hideout, and a lot of the strategies didn't take the Metal Death Plague into account. So starting today, I decided to choose a main weapon that would still be usable even after the Metal Death Plague hit, something effective for both anti-personnel combat and monster extermination. I laid out the options: an Indian war club, a wooden slingshot, ochre clay beads, and a handmade stone axe. But after considering all the conditions, there were almost no weapons I could realistically use. I tested the slingshot first. It had high utility in theory, but when I fired a shot straight at the target, it completely missed. The ochre clay beads were also disappointing. The power was too weak to rely on. So that left only the Indian War Club. Once I accepted the Metal Death Plague as a given, the choice wasn't complicated. The easiest way to deal with zombies was to crush the spores lodged inside the skull with a blunt weapon. And the first item I planned to buy from the level 10 shop was a blunt-type weapon anyway, like an enhanced wooden club, so I needed to raise my proficiency now. But was that really the best option against people? Honestly, it felt uncertain. If I ran into a psychic awakener, I wouldn't even be able to move a finger. Still, I couldn't just sit around. In survival life, killing a human gave 50 points. The murderer system forced deathmatches with nearby users once someone was registered as a killer, preventing abuse, but there would definitely be a flood of people willing to kill others just to earn points, even with the penalties. After thinking about it until I was exhausted, I concluded it was best to avoid those types entirely until I finished farming items and skills. While I was at it, I should dismantle the store completely and install a detector on the second floor. Then I suddenly heard something, a wolf at this hour. There was no way, right? Did one get injured near the hideout? But it was real, and it was huge. Big enough that I could probably ride it. It was a gray wolf, and its breathing had already stopped. What bothered me more was the fact that it had died so close to my hideout. I wasn't sure whether it had wandered here on its own or come down after being attacked, so I decided to check the wounds first. While I was analyzing the body, a small shape suddenly tackled me from behind. That confirmed it. The collapsed gray wolf must have been the cub's mother. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just forcefully separate the cub when it was acting like that, but I also needed to bury the body quickly. If the infected wolf was classified as a monster, it would eventually turn into a bone creeper, and even if it wasn't, the corpse would attract other monsters. Even though I was exhausted, I managed to finish digging the grave. The little cub stayed nearby the entire time, and for some reason, it reminded me of my younger self, and of Monkey, the dog I had raised when I was a kid. In the end, I just gave up on overthinking it. I knelt down and told the little guy, at least in my head, to listen to what his big brother had to say. His mother would be resting here, and I promised I'd even carve a dog-sized opening in the hideout door, so he could visit whenever he missed her. I also told him I'd make sure he wouldn't starve until he grew up, and in return, he could help me with that excellent sense of smell. When I offered food, he let out a small bark, and I decided to take it as a yes. I named him Dingo and told myself I'd be counting on him. A notification appeared, informing me that I had named the gray wolf and successfully communicated with it. From that moment on, the gray wolf Dingo was considered my property. In one word, whenever I said, "Dingo, get ready," he would get unbelievably excited. My kid was a genius. I was bragging at maximum levels, always telling him to do it again just like I taught him, and he would bark back as if answering. I taught him how to paw, how to turn, sit, lie down, and even when to stay quiet. Once he completed everything perfectly, I gave him a reward and asked him to jump for it. Dingo would easily snatch it, which only made me more thrilled. Maybe it was because he was a creature from another world. He was even good at scent tracking. He was a bundle of luck, a total blessing, and still, he was so cute. My baby. Just when I was getting carried away, Yong contacted me first. That was unusual. In his message, he told me to search Leviathan online. I did, and I was stunned. A guy named Calops was claiming he was the first superhuman, warning that zombies and monsters would soon appear and bring disaster. The article hit rank 1 instantly. People were reacting like crazy. Ordinary commenters were saying things like someone joking that broadcast stations must be desperate for hype, others wishing the world would just flip already, and someone complaining about wanting to go home from work. There were tons of reactions from people who didn't know anything about the omens. Then I noticed other comments, sharper ones, mocking him for leaking information, calling him an idiot, saying his brain was probably smooth, or that levitation alone would get him shredded by zombies anyway. Even awakened people were freaking out. It was hilarious. They cursed those who refused to share information, yet hated it when the information they knew was revealed. What I really wanted to know was how the government would respond. Some groups were already trying to use the shock and superpowers as an excuse to start rallies. I decided not to dig too deeply into it. Once the second omen, the Hobgoblin event, occurred, whenever that would be, the government's reaction and direction would become obvious. Right now, I needed to use my time more efficiently. I told Dingo that starting today, we had to begin exploration immediately. He barked in agreement. He was cute, but also big and strong, and it seemed like he would become a very useful asset. For me, preparing thoroughly was the only answer, and I hoped Dingo would help make that possible. When he barked again, I felt confident. Out of everything I could do, the reason I chose interdimensional exploration with Dingo was simple. I showed Dingo the pouch because I figured he could track it. He immediately went to work. The first reason for bringing him was to prepare for the upcoming Hobgoblin event. I needed him to properly imprint the goblin scent. Tracking a hiding spot from just lingering odor worked better than I expected. Next, I needed to see whether Dingo could stay calm in live combat, so I brought him with me to test if he would follow my commands. So far, things were going well, and our hunting was going smoothly. Whenever he did exactly what I wanted, I praised him in my head, telling him he did a good job. I was also trying to confirm whether hunting was really possible in the other world. I reminded Dingo that last time he ran off, so I hadn't been able to check properly. Judging by the size and claws of the animals here, they were definitely stronger than those on Earth. Dingo barked as if agreeing. We continued exploring, and then a question came to mind. What would Dingo's cognition look like if converted into stats? I decided to test it and headed toward the valley. A notification appeared saying that my health had increased by 1. It was surprising that it started happening this early, considering my natural health stat had been 170 as Kimbap Lover. Dingo was growing at an insane rate. I told him not to wander off alone in the forest, his worst habit, but he just burped, so I gave him some water. After looking around, I realized the burning sensation was likely because he had eaten something. And then I saw it, a bull pepper. It was a huge find. I told Dingo, at least mentally, that he did great and promised him lots of treats later. With that unexpected harvest, we set out for our final hunt. I checked with Dingo if there was any strange presence nearby, and he barked in agreement. Red trout weren't classified as monsters, so they didn't grant points or items, but letting a growing dingo experience new things was worth it. I decided we should finish preparing for Phase 2 construction and head home. Dingo barked again in agreement. The next day, the demolition team informed me that the teardown was complete and told me to contact them within 3 days if any repair issues came up. I thanked them for working so early in the morning. Seeing the shop actually torn down hit harder than I expected. Still, it was a necessary choice. If someone ended up lucky enough not to turn into a zombie, looting a store would be the most natural thing in the world. Same with me, if I survive, I'll scavenge too. I have no right to complain. Still, I figured I should at least clean up. Then I realized everyone else must be thinking the same thing. Yong showed up and said he had only left the bare minimum equipment yesterday as well. I was a bit surprised and asked why he was there. He tapped me on the head and said he came to check if I was dead or alive since I ditched him yesterday. But suddenly, Dingo started barking at him aggressively. Yong jumped back in shock and asked if I had always owned a husky. I told him no, my old dog had crossed the Rainbow Bridge long ago. Dingo was a new pet I brought home recently. Yong found him adorable. Even so, I wanted to know why he came all the way over. He repeated that he was worried about whether I was alive. I teased him, asking if that was really the only reason. He hesitated and admitted it wasn't just that. He was worried about something else too. He said he had found out who the guys were that attacked Mikyung.
Guys, that's the end of the video. If you liked this video, please leave a comment in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Like the video and share it too. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.